Well, here we are once again. And yes, it is time for another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. And today we get to interview someone who has some very unique attributes. The most important one, it seems to me, is that she has been given an award as the Kickass Single Mom. So we're going to hear about that. She's a professional life coach. She has written 2 books and is working on another. And I'm sure we're going to hear all about that stuff. So Vanessa Osage, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Thank you, Michael. It's good to finally be doing this with you.
Yeah, we've been working at this a while, haven't we?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's start, as I love to, with just kind of learning about you, early life and all that, growing up, and anything that you want to tell us about being a kid and any of that kind of stuff.
Sure. Okay. So, about 26 years ago, I left the East Coast. So I grew up north of Boston in kind of a small town, New England, very Catholic little town, pretty charming, just very old with a town center, and we could walk everywhere.
What town?
I grew up in Chelmsford, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. I know where that is.
All right. A lot of people know Lowell.
Yep.
And I was born in Concord, which is right by Walden Pond. So that's some historical reference.
There you are.
Yeah. So I grew up there. I'm one of 5 kids within 6 years, which is pretty wild. And I was very much what they call the tomboy. So I feel fortunate too, even just generationally, that I grew up in a time where I spent the bulk of my time outside, climbing trees, playing in the dirt. I had 3 brothers, so I would skateboard with them and got to ride. My first love was horses, so I found a way to, be around horses as a young person. And that was my childhood in New England.
But you don't have that Massachusetts accent.
I don't. Like I said, it's been 26 years. I've been on the West Coast now. I live up in Bellingham, Washington, near the Canadian border. And my folks were from the South. And so every once in a while, I'll meet someone and they hear a little bit of Southern accent. But I have some of the East Coast sensibility, I think, a little bit of that, straight talking, tell it like it is. There are things I try to hold on to from the East Coast,
So do you miss the snow?
No, well, we get snow here in Bellingham.
You get some, yeah.
Just a bit. Yeah. I love living here where there's some season. I lived up and down California, and that got strange to not have the seasonal markers of time. So I do like having some season, definitely.
I like the snow. The ice was more of a challenge after the snow was there and froze, just from a walking standpoint, but I loved the snow.
Yeah.
It was totally different for me. I had experienced a little bit of snow in California, but not a lot. Mm. And so when I lived in Winthrop, Mass for 3 years and spent time in Boston before then in Back Bay, I did experience a lot of the snow. And of course, all the walls of snow set up along the streets when they were plowing the streets and navigating those. So it was fun though.
Yeah, it's a way of life. It's skills that are worth having, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's good to have lots of experiences. Yeah. So you went to high school and everything back there, and did you go on to college?
So I had a pretty poignant high school experience, and I write about this in my first book, Can't Stop the Sunrise. I almost ran away when I was 9, and then someone brought me back home. And then I almost left when I was 17, and I ultimately decided to stay until I was 18, graduate high school, and then I ran away to California. So I did go to high school in Massachusetts, and did all my later schooling up and down California, a little bit in Oregon as well.
Where did you go to college?
You want the 7 schools?
Oh, sure. Whatever you want to say.
Sure. Let's see. I'm trying to think how much backstory you all want. So it took me 12 years to earn my bachelor's degree because I spent the bulk of my 20s driving back and forth across the country. And, that story, I won't go into it because I've told it so many times. But if people are curious, it's Can't Stop the Sunrise is my memoir. It's in print. It's also an audiobook. The quick version is that I was sent away for speaking up about an obvious injustice. And that was a real turning point in my life. I had to kind of question the right order of adults and right and wrong. And so when I left home, it wasn't just the kind of going off to pursue my education. It was like getting away from my own inner survival. And so I did all this time traveling around the country, back and forth, living out of my car. I've been to all 48 contiguous states and parts of Canada. And so I had a rhythm where I would pick a town in California that had a junior college and then stay there, 8-9 months, do a couple of semesters. I also paid my own way through college, which was really satisfying. And then I would get the urge and I would just go and travel the country. I'll give you those colleges. So I went to Sierra College in Rockland, which is north of Sacramento, Ventura College, which is on the coast north of LA, Sierra, Ventura, College of the Redwoods in Eureka was where I earned an associate's in social science. I went to Humboldt State University, studied some environmental resource engineering. I went to the University of Oregon and studied sociology. And then I guess it's 6. I always thought it was 7. There was a college called New College of California in San Francisco in the Mission District. They were able to take all of my credits and let me put some life experience to it. And I got a bachelor's of arts in humanities with gender and ecology being the focus. So that was 12 years earned and paid by myself, no debt, which is really a nice footing to start on. But I was 30 years old when that degree came in the mail. So it's not the path for everybody, but for me, it was a really sweet balance of like kind of theoretical study of what the world is and then real experience and encounter with what I could see of the world.
Well, there doesn't need to be a defining path, it's everyone does things in their own way at their own time. So that certainly sounds like it makes sense to me.
Okay. Yeah, it worked for me. Yeah, there was value in it for sure.
Well, so what did you do with all of that knowledge? And I mean, the knowledge isn't just what you got in terms of a degree, but you had 12 years with lots of exposure to lots of different things. And I got to tell you, I'm a little envious, but what did you do with all that knowledge?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about that concept of being envious. I gave myself all the time to see all I needed to see. And so what I've done with that knowledge, I was a birth doula in my 20s. So I assisted women in childbirth. And then after I had my own child at 30, I was pregnant when that degree came in the mail. It's kind of like, oh, good thing that's done. And so I had this vision to do kind of what like a doula program, so support for the puberty and sexual maturity transition. And it wasn't like I sat down and said, I'm going to start a nonprofit. It was more that I had a vision and I was committed to making it happen. And really, it does correspond to my degree. So I created what became a nonprofit called Rooted Emerging. And we did puberty rite of passage programs. And just a lot of awareness raising too. Like I put on a dozen events. And it was really satisfying to gather all these amazing people, therapists and educators and wilderness guides and create this experience for young people to bring them from childhood into adolescence with this message of like, you can trust your body, you can know your body, and there's a lot to be gained in this time. And so that was a beautiful stretch for about a decade. And that was my first nonprofit. And I've also trained as a sexuality educator, and I've taught hundreds of people, young and old, in comprehensive sexuality education.
What's been, if you were to find that you have one, what would you say your biggest challenge has been through the years?
Yeah. I think because I was just saying it, like that experience of being sent away for speaking up was really a turning point in my life. Such a loss to like lose connection and faith in society. And but I think the bigger thing, and because your show has a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I do want to speak to this experience that I'm kind of part of an invisible minority in that I'm estranged, or what I like to think of as emotionally liberated from my original family. And you don't hear a lot about it, but we're out there. And so I have a colleague in his 70s, and we work together in the youth rite of passage programs. He also had this experience, and he was actually fostered by the local Nooksack tribe here in Washington. He told me that about 1 in 10 young people have the experience where neither parent is, reliable or trustworthy enough that a child can, stay at home or stay in relationship. And so, so that's been, it's not so much that it's a challenge in itself. It's just, it's a way I move through the world that is like I said, we're kind of invisible, right? Like I don't have that net to fall back on. And this has been true for me something like 20, 30 years. So I don't have that to fall back on. And it's also kind of tough because people assume that I have the majority experience, which is that, at least part of the family is there. So when things happen, when life experiences or life events come up, people just assume that I have, like you'll do that with your family. And that's hasn't been the right choice for me for a long time.
You said that 1 in 10, your colleague says 1 in 10 children kind of fit somewhere in that mold. Why do you think that is?
Why do I think it exists, or why do I think the numbers are what they are? Or?
Maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah. Well, so I think what he and I have talked about is usually there's some combination of addiction or mental illness or violence. And, kids get to the point where they just recognize it's not going to be a safe or healthy place for them to grow. And yeah, it's also, like if the state doesn't get involved, you've got people who just grow through that and are in the world and who have adapted to the world without that structure around them. People, and I think I think part of what that is we just have so much that we're recovering from over the generations. You've got wars or racial hostilities or religious persecution, like any of these things that people suffer and have to recover from, the effects of those play into how people can and can't, be in relationship and raise families well. And sometimes those equate to, some limitations within family structures. I do have lots of thoughts about it. So it's not a lot that you don't hear about it a lot because it kind of challenges a social structure, which is like, you honor your father and mother and you be a dutiful son or daughter. And I think people just don't want to believe that it can go that poorly. And so in my experience, it's fairly misunderstood. Like on the one hand, you have people, like I've had people say to me like, oh, well, I, went away to college when I was 17. Or 18, and I actually don't relate to that because there's a difference for me. There's a difference between like being delivered from one secure structure to another, and then knowing that you have to leave kind of for your own well-being and not having something that you can go back to. And then on the other side of it, there's kind of this like minimizing of that conclusion, like, oh, come on, it can't be that bad, but they're your family, and I think the key piece about that is that, there's something to be said. Well, so the biological urge to go to a parent for protection and support and nurturance, that's really strong, like it's primal, right? And so I've met some people who have this life experience. And when someone gets to the point where they say, like, I actually have to release that just for my own well-being, it's a last resort. I would want people to understand that. And I think there's something to be said for believing kids, and even when kids grow up, right? That's their experience.
Well, the concept of family, I think overall has been accepted as being pretty important. And I'm not hearing you say you disagree with that, but there are times when things may go sideways and not really be exactly what one would expect a quote normal family to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, the concept of family is beautiful and pretty fundamental and huge. And I think because we've got all these generational things that people are, reeling from and recovering from, there's this opportunity to redefine what that means. And I can say too, because I've put some thought into this, is like there are a lot of rewards in that path, much as it's challenging. And I could name those just because I know I don't know if you've got listeners who have this, but yeah, I think the primary one would be like growing through that experience is like, I know I can rely on myself, right? And I can count on myself to meet my needs and be resourceful. And it does lead to this worldview. Like it causes me to see the world as a very wide place full of possibility and, resourcefulness. And it's a certain stance toward the world that I think has benefits, right? That like I don't look to a small group of known people to meet my needs or to feel at home. It's like, it's a much wider gaze. And then also we have so much choice in who we become. And like these qualities of reliability and trustworthiness and loyalty, like I've chosen to cultivate those in myself. And I get that feedback from the people in my life. And then when I encounter it in the world, it's like, I know the value of it, and there's beauty in that, right? Because I've seen how rare it can be. Yeah. And then it also doesn't like, if I decide somebody's not welcome in my life, it doesn't cancel out the fact that I can hold all kinds of gratitude in my heart for what they were able to give and, the benefits that I received, even when things weren't quite right. And the last thing, I'm just going to roll through the top 5 benefits, is that this beautiful thing happens as I get older, right? Like I'm in my mid 40s. And like I said, this has been how I moved through the world for about 20, 30 years. And as I get older, both my parents are living and I keep a distance by necessity and choice. But when I looked to them now as human beings, it's like, they're not the primary figure. It's like, the way I experience it is, it's kind of like unfolding the pages of a coloring book. Like they're a figure, but I open it up and around them, I see all this context, right? Like over time, it's like, oh, look, there's the impact of poverty. Like there's the impacts of shame over being Indigenous. And I see them kind of with my heart, I see them in a bigger picture. Like it doesn't change who they are, or the choices they made, or how I'm going to relate or not relate, but there's something about what that does to my ability to love in all aspects of my life that's really sweet as I get older.
Do you have any interactions with them anymore?
Not with my parents, no.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah. And you've said a number of things that are really interesting and that connect with me. I think probably the most important is, in the way I word it, is life's an adventure, and we really should take full advantage of what it has to offer. And as you said, the world is a very large place and it opens lots of choices. And we should explore those choices, which for a lot of people doesn't necessarily mean they won't deal with family and they don't go back to family. But if we close ourselves off from opportunities to view other choices and experience things, that's a problem too.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. Right. And when you say that, like, it's like closing yourself, the risk is closing yourself to the possibility of greater health. And I think along the way, there are these trade-offs, right? Like, do I want security or do I want the possibility of a healthier environment? And as I've gotten older, I've had to keep moving toward the possibility of healthier. And there's grief in that, and there's unsteadiness at moments and sadness, or, there are all sorts of things. But when you look at the trade-offs of the ways to live, the trajectory of my life has put me toward always pointing toward health. There's something else that you said that sparked something in me. Oh, it's, I think a big part of the way I strive to live, it's like reminding myself it's not what you get and it's not what you encounter, right? Like if I meet corruption when I'm 16 at my former high school, or, I happen to have parents who struggle in these ways, that it's not what you get, it's what you do with it, and like the what you do with it is, I think, the adventure that you're speaking to.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, moving, as you said, toward health and and what you view that as being, as opposed to security, maybe of a smaller family, it doesn't seem to me that they're mutually exclusive, because opening yourself up to making choices, yes, there's risk in that, but there are so many more rewards by opening yourself to being able to make choices and exploring new things, because you learn so much more. Because if you just stick with family or with a small group of people, let's not just say your family, but a small group of people, and you don't look beyond that, we all miss so much by that happening.
Yeah, well said. Right. It's like the trade, it's like going with the known versus moving toward the unknown, right? Like you're saying. And I think that, right, like we were saying, the concept of family and home and connection, like those things can exist in so many beautiful forms. And again, it doesn't cancel out, the people who brought me here are always the people who brought me here. Like what they gave is always there, right? Like
right.
it's this balance of like I said, holding the gratitude in my heart. And what I think I hear you saying is like optimizing the time that we have alive in this amazing place, right? To say like, how am I going to craft the life that's possible for me? So yeah, it's all.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I know I had choices to make growing up, and I had a very loving family and a very supportive family. But yet, coming out of college in 1976, I had the opportunity to accept a job and literally on one Sunday fly from Southern California to Boston, where I had never been anywhere close to Boston, fly alone, and essentially start a whole new life with a job that I had no idea exactly what all was going to happen, because it was really defining a new process and a new project that I became a part of. But the value of it was so immense. Who could resist, even though there were a lot of scary parts to it, just going to a new place. And as I said, getting used to the snow in Boston and experiencing for the first time when it happened, that there were sidewalks that had these mounds of snow or walls of snow along the sides of them, between them and the street, and finding that little pathway to then go out into the street and cross the street was fun, was an adventure, and it was daunting, but still, I wouldn't trade the experience for the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful, right? That like what it takes to step into the unknown. And I, just this moment of acknowledgement for the courage of the levels of unknown that you navigate, and with the limited sense that you have to, right, draw on all this courage to, like move through spaces that have these phenomena that just make that challenging. Yeah.
But the other part about that is that I had 26 years and 8 months, if you will, before, or 7 months before taking that step, to learn the tools, the techniques, and the processes that helped me make that step successfully. So it wasn't such a risk, because I had already learned the tools that allowed me to be able to do that, whether I was doing work close to home or 3,000 miles away. And I think that's really the important part about it, is that we need to recognize it's the tools that we learn and how we learn to put those tools to use. So in a sense, it wasn't nearly the risk that it could have been, because it didn't matter whether I needed to cross a street in Irvine, California, or Boston, Massachusetts. And more, it was an issue of putting the tools to use, calming down, stepping back, and recognizing that, hey, how is it really so much different here? Other than a lot of people said that the people who drive in Boston and in Massachusetts are as crazy as the people out here, which is probably more true today than it used to be.
I can verify. Wow. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's beautiful, because it's what I hear you saying is like there's almost this template that you reinforce in yourself when you're navigating the unknown. And it's like the lived experience of moving through the unknown can be applied in other places. Does that sound like what you're speaking to?
Well, whether you're living in one place or that you're used to or another place, what's the difference in the two? You're used to one and not the other,
right.
But you also had to get used to that place originally. So right. Is it really all that different if we remember and learn and use the techniques that we have gathered along the way?
Yeah. Yeah. And as a positive reinforcement, right? You figured out something once, right? Like you navigated the unknown once. And so, right, it can be done again and again and again.
Yeah. It's not all that magical. It doesn't mean that there aren't challenges,
right?
But it isn't all that magical if you remember you've already been through those challenges and you can move on.
Right.
Well, in your life today, what is the one thing that maybe you're kind of the most proud of accomplishing to date?
Yeah. I would, the first things that come to mind have to do with character. I just pay a lot of attention to the choice in what we cultivate. And I think what I'm most proud of is that I've become somebody who's, solid and loving and uplifting to so many people in my life, and that my life has so much love in it. I think it's probably the primary one. And, I have all this energy and excitement for what I'm still wanting to accomplish. And I feel satisfied that I've been able to pull so many amazing people together and create a structure for ways that we can make the world better together. And that's been a satisfying accomplishment. I also get a lot of good feedback that the books that I've written just help people so much, like inspire them and affirm them. And so it's sweet to know that something that I've devoted time and energy into continues to, positively impact people. That's sort of the secondary accomplishment.
Well, you say you brought a lot of people together. Tell me more about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, that first nonprofit with the Puberty Rites of Passage, I had a girls program and a boys program and all of these events all for youth empowerment and sexual health. And so it would mean it would mean collaboration and creating offerings and, and then just kind of some board meeting discussions about how can we improve this aspect of life for young people. So it was about a decade that I think about that. And as I reflect over it quickly, I just see all the incredible strength and heart and the people that came together, and that I was able to create this outlet for doing something with that is satisfying. And then second, I also founded the Amends Project for reform and private education. And, that has waves to it, and who knows what I'm in this nice place of release of I don't know exactly what the future holds with that work. But when I re-engaged that in 2016, 17, 18, people from around the country reached out and were so happy that I was kind of naming the unspoken truth that there was all this energy they wanted to contribute to making things better. And I was able to create this initiative for transparency and oversight. And I think be a spokesperson for what's possible as far as transforming systems. And even if, the initiative isn't running fully, it's just being able to craft a solution and let people contribute to that, the hope that gives is something that I'm glad to have, made possible for people too.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the initiative, what it is and what you do or what you did with it?
Yeah. So I want to be succinct as well, is that, the Boston Globe revealed in 2016 that there had been hundreds, thousands, most likely, just these abuses of young people by staff and or clergy in the church, right? The Boston Globe in 2001 exposed the Catholic Church for all this abuse of children by authority figures. And then in a similar vein, I guess there's a better word, but in a similar power structure, I think, elite boarding high schools, were kind of abusing the same dynamic with young people. And so it's this intricate system, of people staying silent and wanting to get the rewards of belonging and, affluence in the case of elite high schools. And so the issue really was that it wasn't just that people were doing this abuse of young people. It was that there was all this strange pressure to be silent. And, that was the thing I was sent away for, was when that popped up at my high school. And I said, well, this is wrong. Of course, something has to be done. They didn't want that, right? Like they wanted me to just be quiet about what I'd seen, and I wasn't willing. So let's see, to be, again, can't stop the sunrise, the whole story. The initiative has to do with creating a group of people to receive those reports that aren't the police, because the police are scary, generally to young people, and especially to people of color. It's like we've seen it's a space that's hard for a young person to bring vulnerable information to, right? So if you only have the police and or the staff and faculty of these schools as people to receive information, one, the kids are probably unlikely to go to them, right? Like if your options are police or your teacher, you're probably going to choose your friend or nothing, right? Or your parents if you've got that backup. And so the initiative is called the Justice Corps, the committee to oversee the rights and protections of students. And the model is, and people can go to the Amends Project site, to the Justice Corps initiative, but the idea is to create this other entity of, volunteer, non-affiliated adults who are trained in, mandated reporting, to just track and receive these reports, not to judge right or wrong, or this happened or didn't happen, but just to create this database of like, this is the information that we're gathering of what young people are saying, and let that be accessible to parents when they're choosing whether or not to send their kids to these schools. There's so much I can say about it. I presented it to the Association of Title IX Administrators Conference in 2020. And I think what's happened so far is I just spent the past year consulting with a school in the Bay Area, because they were reckoning with, a young person who had grown up with that experience and was coming back for legal action or restorative action. So I worked with them for a year, and I just flew down there to do professional development with their staff and faculty, to talk to parents, and then to also work with students, because I've been a sexuality educator. I've opened that door for them. It was beautiful work. They've really met this with a lot more courage and honesty than any school I've seen so far. And I had a lot of collaboration with the press in 2018 back east. So I've had some exposure, but I worked with them for a year and then got to go down there just recently, did a DEI assessment, diversity, equity, inclusion assessment at the school as far as safety for, equality and the rights of young people. And I left the door open for them. It's like, if this is a model you want to take on, I'm here. And I think pushing too hard has not been a way that I want to proceed. And we'll see. It tends to go in waves, right? Like waves of reckoning. So hopefully that gives you kind of an overview and a sense of how I've tried to channel that into something more positive.
Can you, or would you give us a story of maybe someplace where the database really helped resolve or deal with an issue? You're keeping a database, and that's great, but what has it done? So what's a story where it really was very successful in your eyes?
I wish I had that story. I'm not quite there yet. So really what I'm asking schools to do is take a huge step. And no one has officially taken the step yet. And so what I see being possible is that it's basically an acknowledgement of like, hey, this is a problem, and it's been a problem across the country for decades. I mean, yeah, I give a lot of credit to the internet for making what was hidden no longer hidden. But the idea would be that a school, instead of trying to keep things quiet and brush, confidentiality agreements and all of these moves that lawyers especially will encourage a school to do to keep themselves safe, to keep the institution safe, that instead of doing that, they make it available for public review, not just whether it happens, but what the response is. So yeah, I look forward to the day when I can tell you that story. But this is the best story. Yeah.
Let me ask the question a slightly different way, because
Sure.
I would think you have some of this. Do you have any stories of where, say, a parent used your database and made some decision that they really then were very positive about because they made the decision, that history proved them right because they made the decision using your database? Maybe you don't hear those. I'm just curious.
Yeah. And again, I think close, like if you look at that process, say like phase one of the process is bring, like in the Amends Project, it's got the 3 steps, like bring the truth to light, hold leaders accountable, enact lasting positive change. I was really engaged with this, 2016 to 19. And so if the first step is bring the truth to light and reveal what's really happening, Can't Stop the Sunrise has a number of stories. Of course, my former high school, Lawrence Academy in Groton, Massachusetts, is the one that I've got the most insight with and the most engagement, in doing like the first phase one, bring the truth to light, kind of reveal what everybody's worked to keep hidden. There was a lot of revelation of things happening there. And a mom, so when the school, it re-engaged and the school offered, I'm trying to be succinct too, because it's such a long story. I chose, instead of suing my former high school for $2 million, they wanted me to agree. They basically said, we didn't do anything wrong and you can't talk about it, but we can settle this in court. And that wasn't acceptable to me because that only reinforces the problem. So because I wasn't willing to take that route with them, I then went to the press. And what was really sweet was I think maybe this is the kind of story you're requesting, is it was a long and difficult road because they really they wanted to invalidate everything I was saying because it pointed to a really unpleasant truth about how things happen there. So I got an anonymous letter in the mail, and it was 2019, from a mother. And her children, I think, either were almost graduating or had graduated high school. And she basically wanted to thank me. Like they had been trying to get the Lowell Sun, the paper near the Boston Globe. They were trying to get the Lowell Sun to expose this, pay attention to it, but they weren't going to put their names on it. So the Sun, didn't print anything. Yeah. And so she wrote to me just to say how grateful she was that I wasn't willing to be bought by the system that silences people, and that I was willing to speak out and, try to make things better for young people. So there were a number of those people. When I had that article in the Lowell Sun in 2018, I was amazed at the way people found me, like even with the Lowell Sun not putting this petition I had created, people just found me through my first nonprofit and were so eager to have that relief of like, oh, you're saying that truth that they tried to bully us into keeping quiet. And so, whether they chose to send their kids to the school or not, or that's still kind of played out, but just that it's really energizing for people when someone names the formerly unspeakable. And I got to witness a lot of that relief back then.
And that's what I was asking about, was you've had and seen those experiences. And that's my point, is that people value what you did. Well, your first nonprofit, is that still going on?
No, it kind of had it was tapering off. And so 2019 was the switching year, like Rooted Emerging, my first one. I let that go slowly. And then 2019, I filed articles of incorporation for the Amends Project to be a Washington State nonprofit. So I basically fed one into the other.
So you did that in 2019, and and you're keeping busy with that?
It's kind of an evolving process, and so 2019, I was doing that. I presented in 2020 to the Title IX folks. And then, pandemic, March 2020. And there was always that question of, there's that, for me, there was the balance because I wasn't fully funded. It's like, how do I support myself and contribute to this work that's, what parents called, oh, hey, Michael, I got to tell you and your listeners, it actually just started snowing here in Bellingham right now.
There we go.
There it is.
Well, we don't have snow in Victorville, but they're saying we're going to get some. We probably won't get snow in Victorville, but we will get rain later in the week. So
okay.
Thanks for sending it down this way when you're done with it.
Yeah. It'll warm up in California. I got the view out my office window. I was like, wait, there's snow. So the pandemic, early 2020, I was just kind of like going. How do I get this initiative going and allies? And then everything got quiet. And it was such a blessing because I've always been a writer first and foremost. Like I was 10 years old and it was like this way of life for me. It was a lot of, I think, what kept my inner world healthy and alive as a young person. So the pandemic shut everything down. And March 23rd, I think Washington did stay home, stay safe. And then it was so clear to me what to do. Like I had a position disappear. And so by April 1st, I was writing full time. And I wrote my memoir, Can't Stop the Sunrise, in about 6 months. And it was really a chance to like pause and say like, okay, what is the long history of this issue? I want to get a record of everything I've been doing because I was so engaged, just interacting with the school and lawyers and not lawyers. And, and so I had the book ready in time for my presentation to the Title IX administrators in October. It was a whirlwind, but it taught me that I can really hunker down and write a book. And it's been a really powerful tool to keep that message spreading. And yeah.
Did you publish the book yourself or did you find a publisher?
So essentially for two reasons, so here's the truth. Stone and Feather Press is my publishing company. I have all these businesses, so I just, added a trade name. And
there you go.
So Stone and Feather Press, and it's got, a mission about advancing human and civil rights through powerful storytelling. So I could publish books through there if I choose to now. But, I had so much experience with people trying to keep me quiet and not say things. And I was ready to take all of the risk and ultimately some reward. I talked to my attorney friend, a guy who went to high school with me, and I was like, hey, people are telling me to be careful that I don't get sued, and he was like, well, here's the thing, the ultimate defense of libel is the truth, and so he read the book. He was one of my 6 readers to review it. And he was like, if they try to sue you, so he's basically said, because they had done all these really terrible things to try to get me to go away, which is sort of the decades old dynamic with my former high school, unfortunately. He's like, if they sue you for anything you put in your book, you just countersue them for all the things that they've done in the past 2 years. And I don't like seeing the world through that lens, right. But I was willing to, it was very much worth doing. And it was satisfying because I got, IndieReader gave it a 5-star review for politics and current events. And then recording the audiobook was really satisfying. So my first book was essentially through my publishing company.
So I'm presuming, maybe I shouldn't, but they didn't sue you.
Not yet. No, I'm just kidding. No, they have not. Mm-hmm.
And what's happened as a result of publishing the book and concerning them?
Well,
anything that you're aware?
I think I still feel the heavy-heartedness of like, I wish I had anything close to positive to say about how they handle me.
Sure.
So I sent a copy of the book to the current headmaster, and I do reveal in the book something that he worked really hard, that he would also like to keep quiet. I think that's why I so value characters. Like I've watched too many adults opt for, I don't know, comfort over character. I sent a copy to him and said, just wanted you to see this, and here's to a brighter future, and no comment. The sad thing I can share, I was reminded of this when I went to that school in the San Francisco area recently, because my former school had tried to arrest me on campus when I went to open house, which is really absurd. And, the story's in Can't Stop the Sunrise. My 25th reunion came up during pandemic, and all of these former students had been re-engaged, right? Because I was working with the press, and they wanted to see some accountability and positive response. So the tragic thing to me is that all these former classmates of mine tried to get me invited. Everybody gets invitations to a reunion, but even despite the efforts of at least two of my former classmates, I never got an invitation to my high school reunion. Just all these ways. And the thing is, I actually know it's not specifically personal. It's what I represent. Like, I represent the person who's not willing to be quiet about what they do that harms young people, because I'm not looking for what they're offering, anyway. Yeah, I don't have anything positive to report there, but the future is open, I don't know what that looks like. I always hold an open heart for there might come a day when there's acknowledgement. I let go of any money. There are ways to make things right that don't involve me sacrificing my dignity. And if one of those pops up down the line, may we walk it, but I've just had to say, there are ways for me to focus on positive change that don't hinge on them doing the right thing. So I have to let that go.
Ultimately, you don't have control over what they do. That's their choice or their choices. How do you keep from becoming bitter, though, when you don't see acknowledgement about what they haven't done to address anything?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple of things, in preparing for this, I was reminded of this kind of life philosophy that I laid out 5 years ago, which is before all of these things re-engaged, 2016. That wasn't 5 years ago, I don't think. But some years ago, I laid out a personal philosophy, and 3 points. The first one is to embody health. Everything starts with that. And I'm sure when I put your question through that filter, it's like caring about how it's impacting me and who I become is maybe one of those screens. But anyway, The first piece is embody health. The second one is love better. And, it's kind of uncomfortable looking at them through that lens. But I think a way is sort of like, okay, this is the severe limitation that they're still operating under. And I think loving well is to say, you are firmly planted in that limitation. And I see that that's where you are, and letting go, kind of what you were just saying. The third piece, I think, more directly applies to this and to any social justice work that I engage in, is to create meaningful beauty. These are the 3 things I strive for in my life: embody health, love better. There's always a way to love better, and create meaningful beauty. So I can create something meaningful in social justice work, which is how I look at this kind of institutional reform. But if I let go of the beauty part, I run the risk, like you're saying, of, meeting disdain with disdain, right? They handle me with disdain because I am out of the pale of their world and how things work. And if I respond with disdain, then I'm not creating meaningful beauty. I'm creating potentially meaningful disdain. And it is a challenge, right?
And it's a health issue too, because if you're meeting with disdain and anger, that hurts you.
Yeah, it's a journey, and I think as a woman, in my experience, anger can be very chastised in women, right? And there's a function for that. I have a lot of reverence for anger, and it has a powerful place in my life. And I see it as it's the energy to do what you need to do to honor, to protect what's important to you. So I always leave a place for anger, but that when it goes to bitterness or a certain darkness, I definitely have to watch for that. And then it kind of comes back, like you're saying, comes back to embody health. So how do I not stay bitter? And I think panning back, and spending more time with the school on the West Coast and collaborating with people who do have willingness to look with honesty and humanity at the situation, that's been really healing for me as well. It's there are different ways for institutions to respond. I'd rather put my energy into working with this other school that I had no connection with prior. And, she found me because of the headmaster, found me because of an article I had written. But yeah, it's a discipline that you have to watch. And those 3 criteria help, keep me on track.
Do you find that schools are more open and less like the schools that you went to in the East? Do you find them more open in the West at all, or do you think it's pervasive all over?
I'm smirking because, just so much of my life, more of my life is on the West Coast now than the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And I have done so much contemplation on, East Coast versus West Coast, and open-mindedness would be something I definitely place on the West Coast side of strength. The sad truth is that the issue is nationwide, and I think international as well. I had an interview with a gentleman in the UK years ago. And so the issue, the West Coast isn't immune to the issue, is the tragedy of it.
Right.
The response, yeah. I mean, my data set is small, I have a number of East Coast schools, and there were, my book is one of 3 books about the whole boarding school. They all came out around the same time too. Lacey Crawford wrote a book about a school in New Hampshire. So just, 20, 30 minutes from my school. Anyway, I believe the West Coast has a lot more open-mindedness. And I could say, I have all sorts of thoughts about why. Just the spread of puritanical ethos in New England, and even how sexuality is regarded in the Northeast versus how it's regarded on the West Coast. So yeah, I've just had the one school that reached out to me for help in San Francisco, but so it's not a whole lot to go on. But yeah, given my East Coast, West Coast life experience.
Sure.
Cheers to the West Coast there.
It seems to me that perhaps one of the reasons for your perception is that things are so much newer out here and maybe haven't or didn't get the opportunity, if you could put it that way, to settle into such rigid kinds of things that we find on the East Coast. And I've seen some of that too, in different ways. There are some things that I see that are the same in terms of some attitudes. The attitudes about blindness that people have run the course from positive to not, and it goes all over the country, all over the world. But I think a lot of things are a little bit more open out here because they're newer. That is, the whole institution system is newer. Maybe that helps. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that, and the part of me that's part Indigenous has to say, well, the United States of America experiment is newer. But yeah, I think also, I feel like somebody was saying this to me, is the settler, the European colonial settlers on the West Coast are also the ones that were, they were pioneers that sought out this mythological wilderness, right? And so, that's not that many generations ago. Excuse me. Yeah, so it is totally intriguing to me, and I'm appreciating that, right, you have the California and the Boston perception as well. And I lived in California for 7 years, up and down, and so yeah, those are some pretty stark cultural contrasts there. Even though it's still the United States, there's a lot to be said.
And unfortunately, we do have some cultural, perceptual, racial kinds of issues that do go across the board, which is unfortunate. And we need to deal with that. Maybe one of the advantages of technology and social media, or at least the electronic media, is that over time, more of the challenges will come to light so that people will learn to deal with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was a late adopter to all things technological. I didn't foresee how grateful I would be to the internet for, bringing things out of the shadows that really need to be aired. So yeah, I absolutely agree. It does that.
Well, I've always regarded the internet as a treasure trove, and I understand there are lots of issues with different parts of the internet, and there are a lot of things that are not so good. But overall, such a tremendous way to get access to so much valuable information, and what a great learning experience it is,
Definitely.
which is kind of hard to beat.
Yep. Cheers to that.
So tell me about your second book.
So that was really sweet. I got an email one day out of the blue. I was getting all this great press for Can't Stop the Sunrise. And I got an email from Callisto Media saying, we're really impressed with your work with sexual health and young people. And would you write a book for us? And at first I was like, is this real? And yes, it is. They have Rockridge Press, which released some great books about sexuality. And so it's just a rhythm. So pretty quickly I did that contract with them. And Sex Education for Girls, A Parent's Guide, is a lot shorter than my memoir, but a very practical book. I looked over their outline and just realized, how culturally inclusive and open-minded, like we were saying, the content they needed me to create was. So I was happy to work with them on that. And a similar timeline, like we got that book out in about 6 months, maybe 7 months, with a chapter added. So that came out in early 2022. And that's been really sweet too. For me, it was kind of a retrospective of a decade of sexual health work. Just to kind of put everything I had gathered from working with young people and families into an accessible little guide, kind of as I move away from sexual health work, was really sweet. So yeah, that's out there.
Is that going to be an audiobook too?
They have not asked, and I could almost see why. They really tried to make the format accessible for parents, lots of little paragraphs. And so yeah, it hasn't come up. I believe it's an ebook. So yep, but
well, ebooks may or may not be accessible, which is kind of the reason I asked. And so it just depends on what form they put it in. So something worth exploring. Well, what did you write when you were 10 years old, by the way? What kinds of things?
I remember this so well. I talked about it in an article, but it was just so sweet. So I was sort of in the 80s, and like I said, I loved horses. So I found this horse barn I could ride my bike to and make money, cleaning out the stalls. And I came home from the horse barn, and I had a little blue typewriter. So I set it up in front of my window and just really wrote about my day. And I got to this really calm and meditative place. And it wasn't like I wrote anything profound, right? But there was something profound in the experience, that I could go quiet and let something come through me and just capture my experience in a way that I could then look at it and make sense of the world. And yeah, it was like this huge door opening for me. And so it was really thrilling to discover that outlet at that age.
So what are you doing now? You have amends and so on, but what other things are you doing? I know you've talked about coaching and so on. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the coaching, I'm going to turn a page on my big notebook here. The coaching has been a really sweet part of my professional work, because it just kind of grew naturally, like, putting on events and programs and being the spokesperson. People would come to me, for support. So at Love and Truth Rising, I have a number of coaching packages. I put together one in transforming conflict. I see how important it is for people on the one-on-one scale to have skills to, meet each other in a restorative way. So working with people in their intimate relationships and how they do conflict and personal empowerment. So that's been a nice stream throughout my work, just getting to work with people one-on-one. And I do have space now for one, maybe two new coaching clients. So that's how, has stayed with me for about a decade. And I got certified as a professional coach in 2018, because I was working with so many adults one-on-one. So that's there. And yeah, I'm letting the Amends Project, like I said, kind of rest after this wave and seeing who comes toward me now to adopt that initiative.
See where it goes.
Yeah. And, when you're talking about like staying unstoppable, I think a big part of it for me is like I have this appreciation for like in the cycle of creating something meaningful, like uncertainty and doubt, I just accept that that's part of it, and I don't let that stop me. But yeah, just also trusting that like there are moments when it's healthier to step back and feed what is vibrant. So did you want me to talk about my next book?
Well, I was just going to ask you about that. So
Yeah.
you're going to do more writing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on a rhythm now that it's not quite once a year, right? It was 2020, I released Can't Stop the Sunrise. And then by 2022, Sex Education for Girls, A Parent's Guide. And yeah, it's really sweet for me. So a couple of people in my life were basically like, they love the travel writing in Can't Stop the Sunrise. And some person I had an interview with was like, I think there's another book in there. And so, yeah, I was on a run one morning with the dog, and all of a sudden this whole concept started coming to me. And so, I ran home more quickly and got out my notebook. And I've done so much moving in my life, both like the traveling, and then I move residences a lot. That's part of how I keep my priorities where I want them. And so, yeah, so I decided October 1st, I think it was, to just meet that book and give it what I can to bring it into being. So, yeah, so part of what I'll say for your listeners, I don't have to tell you, but I think you found me on LinkedIn, right?
Correct. Right.
Yeah, which is still my favorite social media, just a little plug for LinkedIn. And so, yeah, I realized like I've done essentially the self-publishing route, and then I did contract book writing for a publishing company, and I'm ready to go the traditional publishing route and work with an agent and a publisher. So I learned about making a book proposal and what agents need. And so, yeah, I October 1st settled into that. And then just last week, I think it was just last week, I sent off a 58-page book proposal to my top 10 agents. Yeah, I'm excited to see, who will take the bait. And I don't know how quickly this conversation goes live, but yeah, I'm looking for the right person to bring that message.
Well, and in the spirit of John Steinbeck, maybe you should call the book Travels with Vanessa. I mean, Travels with Charlie worked really well. Nothing wrong with if it worked once, they'll love it the second time.
I don't know that one. Travels with Charlie.
You've never read Travels with Charlie?
No.
It's about John Steinbeck traveling across the country with his dog.
Oh my goodness. I've never even heard of that one.
Well, also, there you go. So
okay.
Read something new to read.
Very sweet. Yeah. Well, and it's sort of, did you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
Oh, just to say, it's not just a book about my travel writing, but it's really that I've got this unique way of seeing the world through the different kinds of motion. So
I understand.
Yeah. So it's narrative nonfiction and self-help and nature writing. So I use like metaphor in nature about the different ways we move. And then I'm going to gather diverse voices. So basically stories from people around the country about times that they've moved in similar ways. And it's really this framework for seeing how we move and how we can, individually and collectively evolve through that framework.
Well, cool. Well, if people want to reach out to you and learn more about what you're doing, and maybe we'll even help find an agent or something, who knows?
Sure.
How can they reach out to you? Can you give us info about that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Again, LinkedIn is my favorite. A little note about why folks want to connect is always useful. I do have Instagram, so people want kind of like a more casual, private message there. And then I definitely welcome email. So hello@vanessaosage.com. That's my author website. People can.
And Vanessa Osage is spelled?
So Vanessa is Vanessa, and then Osage is Osage. And then you go to .com. Yep.
Great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to hear from your listeners.
And what's your name on LinkedIn? How will they find you? Just search for Vanessa Osage?
Yep. I'm the only one.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on with us today and being here. And now we should let you go enjoy the snow.
Yes.
It's important to be able to do that. But I hope people enjoy what we all got a chance to talk about today. I found it very insightful and valuable, and I am sure that our listeners will as well. So I want to thank you for that. And if any of you have comments, I would love to hear from you. As usual, you can reach me at michaelhi@accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, or you can go to our podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Please give us a 5-star rating when you have the opportunity to listen to this. And I will, as I always do say, tell you that your ratings are so vital and so important, but your comments are as well, your reviews, your thoughts. We want to hear those. And Vanessa, you and anyone listening, if you can think of anyone else that you think we ought to have on Unstoppable Mindset as a guest, I would appreciate hearing from you, and we'll talk with them and work it out. But I really love to hear what people say. So thanks very much, wherever you're listening. And Vanessa, one last time, thank you for you being here today and for all the things that you taught us and your insights.
Thank you so much for having me. I was glad we could do this.